The panel is moderated by Adrian Witter, Programmatic out-of-home and partnership lead at Kinetic. He's joined by CiCi Holloway, who serves as the Chief People and Diversity Officer at Intersection. And filling out the panel is Derek Hagler, Lamar Advertising's Diversity and Talent Acquisition Manager. So let's bring those folks on, and I'll take it away, Adrian, CiCi, and Derek.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon on this panel. Really appreciate you all being here with us and going to have a great conversation with two powerhouses in the industry, and really excited to hear their thoughts around some of the topics we've got here to discuss. Bearing in mind how many questions we received on the last panel, and kind of in the context of time, I'm going to dive right in to our first question here. And I will start with CiCi. Just what's your biggest piece of advice for getting started with DE&I within an organization?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good seeing everyone. And so getting started. Okay, so getting started, I first say we should establish the reason why. You know, some of the things from diversity professionals, we just are so eager to get it and get started. Sometimes I say pause. Let's start with why. And not just the why, but why is there a need in your organization at this time? And I think really trying to get that level set. And then the last piece is, what do you want to accomplish? So if you can get the why and the why now and what we want to accomplish, now we're ready to get started, right? And so for us at Intersection, we focused around three things, which I think are pretty routine for other organizations. The why really impacts the employees. So how do you get started? You focus on the workforce, you know, and many of us, I heard the panel prior to this, and I just heard Stephen reference it, there's underrepresentation in our industry. So how do you start closing some of those gaps? That's how you get started. You look at your representation, you look at your numbers, you look and see where those gaps are, and then the why. And then for the workplace, I say you got to be more inclusive, right? So that's another way that you can get started. Listen to the employees. We use surveys, we use ESAT scores, we use focus groups, but a way to hear what your employees are thinking in this current state, I think, is another way to get started. And then the last piece of advice is to be very transparent around what you want to do. What are those goals, and how and the metrics that you're going to measure success? Be very transparent with your employees to be inclusive, and communicate with them so that they know that you really mean business. And I think that's a way that you get started.
Awesome. And Derek, similarly, like, what are your takeaways from that question? What would you advise there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people on this call can probably relate to being a perfectionist. And I think with that comes the fear of messing up, the fear of doing it wrong. You know, because it's a sensitive thing, but you can't let the fear of not building a perfect program or not saying the right thing prevent you from getting started, because, you know, you're no better if you do nothing. And so you have to be open with your employees, kind of like CiCi was saying, have an open door policy, promote transparency so that whenever you do make mistakes, your employees can correct you and don't take it as, you know, don't be defensive. It's more constructive criticism, because we're not perfect. You know, everyone's different. There's no perfect way to do anything. So it's really just a constantly evolving field, and we can't let fear stand in the way of doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you guys both reference, you know, just that constant feedback communications with employees. And I imagine, CiCi, that's very crucial in how you guys determine those thresholds and the way that you're going to measure effectiveness ultimately of whatever actions are being taken. What are some, you know, just in a follow-up question to that, what are some of the ways that you've gone about encouraging and fostering an environment of getting that feedback in a more substantive way? Because there can be sometimes, I know, speaking from experience, as one of the participants, there's not usually a lot of participation at the outset of these things.
Well, so I can go first there if you want. So one of the things that I think was important with us getting started was, as I said, listening to the employees. And everybody doesn't listen the same way, and we certainly don't share information the same way. Especially if, again, in our industry, there's underrepresented groups with which mean there's small numbers of those employees, right? So whether that's our Black and Brown employees, whether that's our LGBTQIA employees, but the ability to share that information um, isn't always as open and trusting. And the way the message comes across and the way you secure that information may be different for different people. So I mentioned earlier we use surveys. Yep, I think a lot of companies use surveys, but we also did one-on-one discussions. We had focus groups. We call them focus groups, boot camps, round tables. But we had abilities to have employees share information in smaller, more intimate group settings. Um, we also, right, I didn't conduct those meetings. So I felt that, if you really want to hear information, sometimes it's a third party, an external confidential resource that you can bring in so that you can get that kind of information. Because my objective wasn't who gave it or how we got it, it's what we're going to do with it to make progress. So that was why I say we have these different approaches and different tools to get the information.
Awesome. Cool. Derek, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I can just piggyback on that. I think whenever it comes to surveys, there's multiple ways to gather information, right? And all employees feel differently about presenting their opinions. So it's important to make sure that people have anonymous ways to give information, right? So anonymity can go a long way. So just make sure whenever if you don't have a survey tool or you're investing in survey tools, make sure that that's an option, because employees will be a lot more willing to give feedback, through something like a survey. And then outside of that, focus groups are great, and just relationship building, making people feel comfortable expressing their opinion, inviting opinions, because you can't just sit there and wait for people to feel comfortable. It takes relationship building to allow people to voice their concerns.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Speaking of relationship build, the other thing that I probably should have mentioned was we also can and did leverage our employee resource groups for feedback as well. Because within the employee resource groups, there's already an established level of trust. There's already an established level of collaboration. So that was another resource for us.
Following up off of those comments, and thank you both for sharing, it's really insightful. I'd like to know what you would say are some of the most difficult parts of implementing the DE&I program. And if I just think off the top of my head, two of the ones that are most present are, the virtual nature of work now, and how to, solicit feedback from individuals when you're not able to have that kind of in-person conversation. But also with regards to fragmentation, if there are a lot of ERG groups, as you kind of mentioned, CiCi, how do you coalesce the conversation to make sure it's something equitable for involved? What are some of the challenges you guys have faced in getting DE&I initiatives up and off the ground? CiCi, trying to go first.
Sure. So I think you'd say, what are the difficulties? So whether the opposite of challenges or opportunities. So I think the real challenge and or opportunity is ensuring that the leader, the CEO, your C-suite, is really visible and committed, and that level of commitment is communicated to the organization. Because I think the challenge and the difficulty is belief, and believing that there's a need for change for some people, and then if there is a need for change, that there's going to be change. And so really seeing a visible commitment from your CEO has really been a strength for us. CEO communication, involvement, visibility has been key. And then often, here's something else I find, whether it's this industry or any other industry, the C-suite often gets it. And then our employees are all energized and get it, like their employee resource group and their programming. It's something called the frozen middle that doesn't always get it. And that's my challenge, right? The challenge is really trying to ensure that everybody is included and that there is an inclusive environment for everybody. But it's that frozen middle that can sometimes opt out or not quite see the clarity as much as your C-suite and your employees.
Yeah, I've never heard that. Sorry, Adrian, I think I cut you off, but I'll just go. I've never heard that, the frozen middle. That's beautiful. Because it's so true, because if you think about, communicating the goals of a DEI program, a lot of times non-minorities can feel left out. And that's not the intention. It's really just for everyone to be included. And sometimes it can feel kind of like an overcorrection, and sometimes it is because we're making up for lost time, and white straightness has been the norm for a long time. So we are doing a bit of overcorrection, and sometimes that can rub people the wrong way, and outside of that, kind of like Mark and Dawn were saying, it's a marathon with no finish line, which can be a bit daunting at times. Especially whenever you have a passion for, DEI. And I always like to say, walk, don't run, but don't crawl. There's a balance to finding your stride, with implementing a program, but you can't do it all at once. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to, build this perfect program from day one.
In trying to get people on board and again, like overcome some of those challenges, have you found that, some of the goals and milestones that are being set, having them as kind of smaller scale so that they're more regularly achievable, more regularly able to be kind of shone a spotlight on? Has that helped you guys in any shape or form versus some of the, what can seem like daunting tasks of overhauling entire systems effectively? CiCi, I'll ask that one to you first.
Sure, it certainly has helped. It has certainly helped us because, we're a goal-driven organization, and you do that with any other business, right? Component, whether it's sales or marketing, right? You have some goals, you have some milestones. When you've hit success. So the same thing with DE&I. I think having some of those goals may feel like, oh my gosh, that's forever, right? Improving demographics, that's going to take forever. Training the entire workforce, that's going to take forever. So we start smaller. We start with, how do we recruit? Let's change some of the processes. Do we have some barriers up that we could change tomorrow? And are there some measurements in place that we can change, some areas where we can change the workforce rather rapidly? And when we say, I can't find any, well, where are we looking? Let's look some other places. Let's add 5 more places to the list and let's look there. And then, so if we have some smaller milestones, you can hit them, you can achieve. And then at the end, this marathon that we're talking about, at the end, you can look back and see where some of those achievements have not only helped hit your progress, but it's also keeping the employees feel included, right? Because they're part of that process. It also stretches the belief because they see some checks happening where there's things that are really occurring that they are actually driving. So the accountability increases. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. Having some small milestones along the way will keep the momentum going.
Yeah, absolutely. Celebrating small wins. It's good for the ego too. It helps not to get downtrodden about maybe you haven't hit your 5-year goal yet, but you hit your 1-year goal. So setting up short-term and long-term goals is huge. And don't feel like you have to do it all yourself. Invite people to the table. It's about community. So it doesn't have to just be an HR initiative or a senior management initiative. It's everyone's initiative. We're all here, we're all human.
Great answers, guys. And Derek, right on that point, I'm going to send this one back to you on that great comment you just made. What has proven effective in getting buy-in for DE&I initiatives across the entire body of the organization? And what different tactics have you had to deploy in order to do so?
Yeah, I mean, Dawn and Mark really spelled out the business case for diversity so well at the beginning of this. And I hate having to rely on that sometimes, but that's the reality. You know, we are a profit-driven organization. I think everyone on this call works for a profit-driven organization. So you do have to build a business case for it. And the good thing about that is the work has already been done. You know, as they showed you with that study, and there's been countless other studies of just how great for business diversity is. God forbid, you know, doing the right thing actually works for once. But it really is, you know, so it's not rocket science. But if you need to, you know, prove the value, it's been proven. You know, it's hard to deny data or science. So don't feel like you have to start from scratch with that. And then outside of that, you know, appealing to humanity, maybe getting some employee feedback on what they would like to see in a program, so that whenever you're pitching these things up, you have some tangible pieces of this is what our employees want. Because we were talking about retention and recruiting earlier. We want to implement programs to retain our qualified employees, and they're not going to stay if they don't feel like they have a home, right?
Awesome. CiCi, same question to you.
Sure. So I've got a couple of things that that help with measuring and getting that kind of buy-in for success. And one of them I said earlier is making sure that it's at the top, and you know that it cascades, right? That message cascades through the organization. That is one of the, I guess, the way to get buy-in ground up is to make sure that it's appeared as a top-down kind of an initiative. And then I also agree, like Derek said, this is not my initiative, right? So I may be a chief diversity officer, but we all own it. So I think that's another component to make sure that that we get buy-in, that everyone understands that they own something, right? They have some level of accountability. Every level has some accountability. And then, okay, this is probably not fair, but making sure that we've got the proper resources for a successful DE&I. Like, I don't want to do this all on a shoestring, and we've got commitment from our leadership where, you know, we have the right employees, we have the right staff, you know, we got the right budget. And if we're going to do internal and external kind of events, you need budget to do that, you know, so to ensure that all of that will allow for commitment and buy-in to the organization. And then, you know, my mantra is then measure it, right? What gets buy-in is what gets measured gets done. So if we can show, we said we're going to do it, we can show we did it, right? Then that kind of measurement continues with the buy-in.
Yeah, and just one last point on that. You know, with recruiting, DEI programs are as common as good benefits these days, right? So if you're not, you know, making efforts in the DEI arena, you will lose good candidates. You know, it's a competitive strategy at this point for recruiting.
And that costs money. So we need, you know, we need the aligned budget to be to buy-in, internal and external, is ensuring that you've got the right budget.
Yeah, that's great points by all, absolutely. And I'm curious to know from, again, your experience, some of the ways that you combat some of the fatigue that, you know, emotional or otherwise, that people have with regards to DE&I initiatives that could otherwise have a good-natured person kind of tune out to an extent and be not as susceptible to the buy-in and, you know, the messaging that's coming out from that. How have you guys worked to, you know, reinvigorate that buy-in amongst employees and across the board?
So one of the things I think that's important to keep employees invigorated And, it's the human element. What's in it for me? And the what's in it for me can't be done in January and then hope that it's still there in December, right? It has to be like throughout the year. The what's in it for me has to, one, be authentic and be visible, and then achievable. So, so one of the things, where I struggle sometimes is, where employees may not quite see the value of difference. If I can do my job every day, and I've been doing my job every day, then why do I need to do something different, right? And so it really is tying. I heard someone say, Derek, I think you said a little while ago, the empathy to one of the factors of empathy, why it's different. And I have this thing that I'll do periodically, which is check your bubble, check your bubble. If you, the little exercise, if where you live is one demographic, where you go to school, your friends, where you worship, where you shop, where you get your hair cut, like everything is all in one demographic, then you might be living in a bubble that you may miss some of the value of difference, especially when you get to the workplace. So I want everybody to bring their difference to work. So every day. So one of the things that I do to try to keep the momentum and keep people energized is just to remind them that, difference, diversity, the success of diversity depends on everybody, not just a couple of people. And so I will force them to check their bubble sometimes.
I love that. Pop your bubble. Yeah, exactly what CiCi said. Reminding people of the humanity and the why we're doing it. Like recently, I don't know if everyone saw Lamar's Pride campaign, but the video of employee voices was just so powerful to me, and just really reinvigorating to see different employees talk about what pride means to them. Because you don't always get to see everyone, and we're a really spread out company, and during COVID times, you miss a lot of those interactions, and just hearing from your employees about why what you're doing is so meaningful, goes a long way. So
Sure. Absolutely. I think it always helps to see representation from people across the business at various levels, not just the different sexual orientations. Absolutely. So final question for you both. And this again, going off of what you've just mentioned, Derek. When thinking about diverse and inclusive workforces, the ad industry at large, struggles with, wanting to represent our employees from underrepresented populations, and get that right, but also not wanting to tokenize anybody. How do we ensure employees from those underrepresented groups do not feel that they are being tokenized when we're trying to get out messaging such as, a video expressing the diversity of the workforce?
yeah, that can be tricky. But it's actually easier than, a lot of people think. And I think the easy way to do that is giving people a seat at the table. We've kind of been talking about including people. And a lot of times whenever people get tokenized, it's because they're being told that they need to do something, or they're being voluntold, or pose for this picture, but inviting people and giving them a seat at the table, and letting them have a voice in whatever you're asking of them, will go a long way, because people want to be involved if you care, but you have to show that you care first, right?
Absolutely. CiCi?
Yeah, I can almost say just ditto, because I agree with everything Derek just said. I think, well, first of all, let's be clear, right? Nobody wants to be under some form of tokenism or right. So yes, true, underrepresented groups, but nobody wants to be considered a token. So I think just what Derek said is to ask, right? To make the ask of whatever it is that we need with a compelling reason for the ask. And if you have a compelling reason, right, then it's not necessarily viewed as you're the only one that I'm asking, or that you're a token. It really is that we have a need, we've demonstrated the need, we have an intended impact, we want to listen to your voice. And if we do all of that right, then the actions we put in place are bona fide and demonstrate why we did it. So the next time the ask is easier.
For sure. That is, yeah, if there is definitely the value there to be had by the employee, there's no reason why they wouldn't want to participate. And yes, the communication of that is crucial. Guys, I think with that said, we've, wrapped up the immediate questions I had here. Turn it over to the audience, see if there are any additional.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you, Adrian. Terrific panel, guys. Thanks so much. Good questions, Adrian, and terrific answers, CiCi and Derek. Really good information. We do have some questions here. The first one is this: when thinking about implementing DEI programs, how do you best benchmark? What are the measurable goals that companies should think about? They should think about working towards, and what benchmarks are those?
Sure. I've got two hats, right? I got my people hat and my diversity hat, and the two of them dovetail. So in answering that question, I'll put on my people hat, which says, look at the entire life cycle, the entire life cycle of an employee. And that's how we think about implementing DE&I initiatives. It starts before they're even an employee, right? The candidate search. I said earlier, how are you looking? Where are you looking? Is there a diversity lens that you apply when you're looking? So that starts it. Then the selection process. Are there any biases involved in the selection process? Are there any ways that we can ensure that there are no barriers to keep people out, intended or not? So really looking at every pillar of HR, the whole life cycle, from candidate search, hire, once somebody's here, is everybody getting the same level of meaningful feedback? Does everybody have the same opportunity for career growth? So the talent development cycle, are benefits equal to all employees, married, unmarried, eligible, non-eligible, like really, are we really looking at the entire, and if we do audits of our DE&I lens for every single pillar of HR or of the people cycle, we'll ensure that we're making the right decisions when it comes to diversity.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of stats that go into diversity because we want to measure our success by the representation of our people. And through OH United, we, kind of gathered some industry stats and released that information. And we'll continue to gather more information and kind of grow exactly what we're measuring. So you can always compare your stats at your company to the industry stats or national averages or local averages. So using the data that you have to make sure your employee population is as representative as it should be. And if you have weak points, kind of determining how you solve those weak points, right? Kind of like CiCi was saying, okay, if this recruitment method isn't giving us diverse candidates, stop using it, go find another one. So you have to, find ways to measure your own success. And, what is it that if you keep doing the same thing, that's a sign of insanity or whatever the case is. You make sure your actions are worthwhile. And if they're not, adjust them. There's nothing wrong with changing course, if something you're doing is not working. And on that note, making sure that your program meets your employees' needs, because a lot of times we'll think that, we have a good idea and employees will love this. And by doing like pulse surveys or employee engagement surveys, you can actually get a measure of whether your idea was good. And if it wasn't, like I said, don't be offended, use it as constructive criticism and change your course.
That's a great idea. Change course when called for. So don't be afraid to try different things. One more question. How do you make sure there is inclusivity at every level of an organization? It's certainly good to focus on investing in diversity for the future, but how do you make sure that the inclusion is in upper management, in the C-suites, and even on the board, that it's ubiquitous throughout the entire enterprise? Derek, what do you think?
Sure. So if we're thinking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, this is all about equity, which in my opinion is probably the hardest letter to tackle. And because this is where people start to get a little uncomfortable. Because if we're talking about equity, we are having to address that not everyone historically has been given the same opportunities, and no one likes the P word, privilege. But that's what it is. We have to recognize that some groups have been a lot more privileged than others. I'm a white man, and I can recognize that. And we have to do a little bit of that overcorrecting that I was talking about, and accepting that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because if you look around at your senior managers at your company, likely it's going to be a lot of white straight men. For example, at Lamar, we kind of recognized years ago, okay, our general managers in our outdoor division, it's a lot of white men. How can we solve that? And Tammy, our EVP of HR, started a program called the Women's Leadership Network, which is its sole mission is to build women up, give them tools, train, educate, so that they're ready for those promotions. Because we're not, it's not about giving handouts necessarily, but it's about recognizing people that have been unrepresented and maybe didn't have the same opportunities, and figure out ways to help them build themselves up.
CiCi, what do you think?
Sure, I agree with that. And the only thing I would add to that is the absence in C-suites, the absence on boards is not because there's a shortage. That's not the reason, right? So I do believe that the answer can be easier than the fix. The answer is just plain darn, be deliberate. If you want diversity on your board, if you want diversity in your C-suite, if you want diversity on your leadership teams, you can find it, right? But you have to be deliberate about ensuring that it's there. We all read last week that NASDAQ made this public announcement that they will have diversity on the board, right? They will ensure that there are diverse opportunities. We've seen diverse slates that have been required, but when you're selecting your board and you've got criteria, just ensure that everybody has access to that same level of criteria, and that it's not picking people that because if you're in that bubble, the people look like the bubble. And so we got to go beyond just the selecting people we know and be more deliberate about finding difference. It exists.
It's getting out of your bubble, which also creates the unintended bias too. Well, listen, this was a really great conversation. Thank you again, CiCi, Derek, Adrian. Thank you for moderating it. Really appreciate it.